Hi, I'm David Booth. Today's webinar by Ian Harrow is one in a series of webinars on topics related to the Yosemite Project. The Yosemite Project is a collaborative effort whose mission is to achieve semantic interoperability of all structured healthcare information. The Yosemite Project articulates an ambitious roadmap for achieving interoperability based on RDF as a universal information representation. Today's webinar by Ian Harrow on the Pistoia Alliance Ontology Mapping project is relevant to both the standards track on the left of this roadmap and the translations track on the right. It relates to the standards track because standards need to be semantically related to each other using RDF and related technologies. And it relates to the translations side because data expressed in one ontology may need to be translated in order to be combined with data that is expressed in another ontology. And when a mapping from one ontology is provided, that mapping can be used to help in that translation process. Ian Harrow is a project manager working for the Pistoia Alliance. He is also director and principal consultant for Ian Harrow Consulting. He delivers expert project management, bioinformatics, and text mining services, and participates in consortia such as OpenFacts and the GA4GH metadata effort, and BioExcel, which is Horizon 2020. And he has over 30 years experience in the pharmaceutical and life science industry and obtained a PhD from University of Cambridge in the UK. And as a reminder, if anyone has a question during the presentation, you can email it to me, david@dbooth.org, and I will check my email as we're going along. And we will have a Q&A section at the end, and so that I can read the questions to Ian at the end. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, David. Thank you for inviting me to talk to the Yosemite project today. And I'm very pleased to be given this opportunity to just tell you a little bit more about myself in the introduction, just on one slide. The bulk of the talk will be about the Pistoia Alliance itself, how that works, how it came about, what its purpose is. And then one of the projects that I will go into some detail about today is the Ontologies Mapping project, which I'm managing, as you've heard. So this quick slide is about myself. Much of this has been covered already by David. Just to explain one or two things. So my involvement in consortia, these are all sort of open innovation or pre-competitive research consortia. OpenFacts is an innovations medicines initiative, which is a sort of European funded venture. It got 3 years of funding, extended by 2 years, and now it's set up as a self-sustaining foundation. And OpenFacts is a semantically enabled sort of RDF interlinking of different data sources useful for drug discovery. It's sort of open pharmaceutic data. GA4GH, that's the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, is a big global genomics and healthcare sort of consortium. It's currently trying to raise funding. It's been going for a couple of years without too much funding, but that's looking to grow to really make use of the explosion in genome sequencing data, which is coming in on the new sequencing platforms that are out there. BioExcel is a high-performance computing consortium that I've just started to be involved with, and that's a pan-European project. But here today, I'm going to talk about Pistoia Alliance, wearing my project manager hat. And you've heard about my years of experience, so we don't need to talk about that anymore. Okay, on to the Pistoia Alliance. Okay, the Pistoia Alliance, it is a global not-for-profit alliance of life science companies, vendors, publishers, and academic groups that work together to lower the barriers to innovation in research and development. I can remember when this started back in 2008. And at that time, I was working for a large pharmaceutical company based in the US, that's Pfizer. And we came to realize that much of what we were doing behind our firewall was also being done by our competitors. All the other pharmaceutical companies had very similar systems and infrastructure in place, and there really wasn't much benefit in reinventing wheels behind firewalls, doing the same kind of processes and doing them all independently. So it was realized that there was a lot to be gained from cooperating with each other to share costs and share risks on numerous pre-competitive projects. But this had to be done in a way that was safe because the companies could not be put at risk at being accused of colluding. So to make that a safe thing to do, the Pistoia Alliance was set up as a not-for-profit company. It operates out of Delaware in the US, but it operates globally across Europe and the US and also Japan and various. So it's got a big footprint, really. And it really is an open innovation community. The little diagram sort of shows how, you know, at the core of the Pistoia Alliance are the members. I'll talk a bit about them later in later slides. For each project, it has teams that are set up. Some of the teams are professional people, others are in-kind contributors based in the various companies involved in the Alliance. Each project has a steering committee, so it's run on professional lines. The Pistoia Alliance itself has an operations team, quite a lean, efficient operations team who oversee the Pistoia organization. And then there is a board for the Pistoia Alliance, which is responsible for the executive decision making and roadmap and direction and everything. So this virtuous circle is how the Pistoia Alliance operates to deliver useful solutions against ideas coming from the members. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, David. Okay, let's talk about the members because they're at the heart of the Pistoia Alliance. There are 3 tiers of membership available, so that all types of organization can get involved. So core membership tends to be for the larger organizations, the larger companies, commercial organizations in the life sciences. The membership fees are higher for core membership, but you do get more entitlement for your money with the higher fees. And I've listed these in the stack against the core members. So, you know, election to the board, member-only events, and inputting to prioritization, selection, and help with funding of projects. That all applies to core members. The next level of membership is participating members, which tend to be the smaller organizations which tend to deliver technology, content, or service provision. The fees are smaller for a participating company, but it still brings quite a bit of power and influence within the Pistoia Alliance on shaping the projects. And then the third tier of membership are the contributing members. This is for small companies, SMEs, and here we define those as less than or equal to 7 FTEs within the organization, and individual contributing members. And here there is no membership fee. Contributing means contributing in kind to participation in projects. And there are various benefits that come with contributing membership. So those are our different membership levels. Next slide, please, David. This out-of-date list gives you a rough idea of the membership. It's a rather busy slide, this, so I apologize for its busyness. But basically, this is a list of members. Earlier this year, this was compiled. You know, at that time, there were about 70 organizations and individuals were all part of the Pistoia Alliance. And as you cast your eye over this list, you can spot all the major pharmaceutical companies are members, core members as well. The little red or pink C tells you, shows you core membership. So at that earlier in the year, there were 13 core members. Contributing members, over 40 of those, and then participating members, 16. So a considerable membership spread across all these different sectors of the life science industry. So what kinds of project has the Pistoia Alliance produced over recent years? These are 3 examples of recent success. On the left is the Helm project. This is a format which originated within Pfizer. And this is a good example where a company had a need to develop a format to represent macromolecules. There was no standard for doing that. For small molecules, fairly straightforward. There's lots of standards like Chebi and others, Inchi, etc. But no such things for macromolecules. And as antibodies and all sorts of biologicals are becoming more and more important for the portfolios of pharmaceutical companies, this became a very pressing need. So in this case, Pfizer, you know, developed an internal solution. Then it realized that really it would be better to find a way for that to be developed as an open standard, and the Pistoia Alliance provided a good vehicle for doing that, for sharing the development of Helm as a project within the Pistoia Alliance. And over the last 2 years, maybe 3 years, it's become established rapidly as a global standard. It's being adopted by organizations like EBI, for example, have recognized it as a standard. And along with the standard itself, useful tools have also been developed in various ways. So there's a whole kind of ecosystem around Helm, the Helm project, that is now evolving, and it's attracting best practice awards by IT World 2014, etc. So that has and is a very successful project, which is continuing to grow and evolve. A second example is the Controlled Substance Compliance Service. Again, this was something that all companies dealing with controlled substances have to demonstrate compliance, because such substances are heavily monitored and regulated. And so this service has been defined and standardized under the auspices of the Pistoia Alliance, and this has now developed into a standard which is delivered as a service, a compliance service. And this is accepted across many regulatory authorities and domains across the world, Southeast Asia, the US, Europe. So this is growing in importance. And then the third example is Transmart. This is a preclinical or translational science data store. It began life by being developed by Johnson & Johnson. Again, rather like Helm, they realized there was nothing to be gained by keeping it within their firewall, so they wanted to find a way to set this up so it could be developed as an open source, open access resource. And so again, the Pistoia Alliance provided that vehicle. And so now it's been widely adopted as a useful technology platform. Okay, so those are the kinds of example that the project which the Pistoia Alliance have delivered. This next slide shows you how new ideas are bubble up from the membership of the Pistoia Alliance. And we have a platform called the Interactive Project Portfolio, which is a platform, which is IP3 for short. And you can see there's a screenshot taken from a tablet with this mobile-friendly website. And through this platform, ideas can be are submitted and monitored, and interest can be gathered. And this is how projects begin. They bubble up from these ideas coming from the membership. Access to IP3 is open to anybody as a guest, but you get much more use from the platform if you register, which anybody can register on the platform to kind of get involved. And when you register, you are a named individual, which means you can comment on the ideas. You can submit your own ideas and make comments about existing ideas. And so the ideas start to bubble up in terms of strength of interest. And the Pistoia Alliance executive, in a timely way, they can see when ideas are becoming sufficiently popular and of interest to merit a business case to be put together by a project manager such as myself to do all the due diligence to see how compelling the business case is for starting a project. And we're going to see that in the next slide. Okay, so that was that covers the Pistoia Alliance itself. Now I'm turning to the Ontologies Mapping project itself, and I'll take you through that. Okay, so we're going to start with IP3. This is how the Ontologies Mapping project began as an idea on this platform. You can see the original entry for this idea, and there's a bit of text talking about the unmet need. And so this was chosen as a candidate for a business case, which, as it happened, I happened to be the one who wrote the business case for this. Next case slide, please. Okay, so basically, the business case begins with definition of really the problem, the challenge, a statement of the challenge, and so we begin with what to some might seem blindingly obvious. Obviously, ontologies are of critical importance to managing data, but the challenge isn't shortage of ontologies. The challenge is often there are too many ontologies, and you find these not just being used between organizations, but even within a single organization with multiple sites, you can often get forking of the same ontology in different versions, and then you can get different ontologies supporting a particular application or a domain being used in different ways. And so there tends to be chaos and noise and not enough harmonization and standardization. So this is often how things are, coupled with the silo issue with data repositories. And so what this project is about, this mapping project, is really to try and simplify, because what we don't need is another ontology. Rather, what we do need, as this slide shows, is really a better understanding of what ontologies are available for particular domains. Also, a second thing that is really hard to come by are guidelines for best practice to improve the existing ontologies. Very often when they are made use of under the heat of getting things done, a systematic evaluation of quality when it comes to doing things like translational mapping is something that can easily be overlooked. And so we felt it would be very useful for the Pistoia Alliance to provide a set of guidelines for the best practice so that existing ontologies can be made much more consistent and better quality. So we see that as a contribution coming from our community. The final point on that slide, can you go back please, David? Okay, and the final really important part of this project is a tool to map between the existing ontologies. So that is the essence of this project, is that tool. So by having that tool, we can better exploit such ontologies and develop a service for doing that. Next slide, please. We can move along now, David, please. Yeah, okay, I think we did move along. So this is an overall timeline for the project and the deliverables which relate to what I've just run through. Okay, so the project began at the beginning of the second quarter of 2015 in April, and we raised funding after the business case had been successfully made. We were able to attract funding from 4 core members of the Pistoia Alliance: GSK, Merck & Company, Novartis, and Roche. That funding was sufficient for the first 9 months of the project, taking us to the end of 2015. In that time, what we are delivering are first of all, we needed to select an ontologies domain as test case, and I'll talk about that a little later. Second thing we were looking to develop, and by year end for this, is the guidelines for best practice and minimal standards. And a third deliverable is to define the requirements for the Ontologies Mapping tool. Okay, and the next phase, no, hold back. So that's kind of where we are now, and that's what I'll be talking about in the next slides. But just to look forwards, in the second half of this timeline is next year's planned activities. So what we're looking to do next year is to implement the requirements for the Ontologies Mapping tool. However, prior to doing that, we want to make absolutely sure that there isn't an existing mapping tool already out there that substantially meets our requirements. So that's something that's going on now, is to compare what mapping tools are out there with the requirements that we've defined. Because if there is such a tool, then we would get behind it and support it and switch our emphasis to the other aspect for next year, which is to develop a mapping service. So first we would develop the requirements for what an ontology mapping service would look like, and then we would implement the mapping service in some way, probably an RFP type process is what we would do. If on the other hand the mapping tool doesn't exist that meets our requirements, then implementation of the mapping tool is the next thing. That would take 9 months to do, and then the mapping service would be a third phase. So that's why there's an or condition. Okay, the next slide, please, David. Okay, this gives you an idea of how we set up the project. So we have a project champion. Martin Romecker at Roche is the project champion. Gordon Baxter at InStem is the project lead, and I'm the project manager. Our project is funded, as I've said. The 4 funders make up a significant part of the steering committee. We have operational members of Pistoia Alliance involved in the steering committee. Gordon Baxter's on the steering committee as project lead as well. So that's the steering committee. Steering committee meets roughly quarterly and is responsible for the project decisions and its direction. The project team, on the other hand, to join the project team, which is responsible for executing the project and the recommendations made by the steering committee. To join the project team, you need to be a Pistoia member. We currently have 19 members on the project team. There is overlap between people involved in the steering committee from the funders, and they're also on the project team as well. So that's good. And then a final part of the project is the community of interest. This is really important. This is open. Really, to join our community of interest, basically we try and attract folks who are part of organizations, whether they be academic, commercial, or whatever, who have a strong interest in ontologies. And we're looking for relevant skills and experience, because what we do with our community of interest is we consult with our community of interest. So whereas the project team meets every two weeks each month, bi-weekly, the community of interest meetings are monthly. And for the monthly community of interest meeting, that's a short 30-minute meeting, and that is back to back with a short project meeting when those two happen, so that they are aligned through that timing. So that alternates with full 1-hour project meetings. So that's how we run this, and that's how we make sure that we are well connected with the community out there. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm now going to tell you about the progress we're making with this project. We're well into the first phase of the project. So we ran a survey with our membership and the community of interest to help us select test cases. We needed test cases to reality check our guidelines and the requirements, because obviously you can't develop that thinking in a vacuum. You really do need to test it against reality. And so we did a formal survey and then analyzed the results. The project team then agreed on recommendations informed by those survey results. And the recommendations were to use disease and phenotype as a relatively straightforward single or double closely related domain, which has a number of ontologies in that domain, which can be mapped, and that is an obvious need, and any mapping tool would need to cope with that relatively straightforward case. So that struck us as serving as well, and from the survey, it's an important set of ontologies in that domain which are being used. A second area that emerged from the survey was the area of experimental investigation, especially in research. Now that is a much bigger, wider sort of field of application, covering multiple domains. But nevertheless, we felt it was important to make use of that as a test case, because it really is a useful, more complex test case. So that's why we also chose that, as well as disease and phenotype. The other thing to emerge from our survey is recognition of the different ontology types. So, reference ontologies from places like Obo Foundry, very useful, which tend to be reused in different ways. Application ontologies, which tend to support a business need. That could be clinical practice, it could be the regulators. So often things can be rather muddy if it's not made clear whether or not an ontology is serving as reference, or if it's an ontology that is supporting a particular application. That distinction can really help to clarify, what an ontology is all about, what's at the heart of it. And a third type of ontology are the upper level ontologies, which are becoming more and more best practice to make use of upper ontologies to bridge across ontologies. And there are a few of those, and one in particular, the basic formal ontology, is particularly useful. So we recognize and we want to make use of upper ontologies in our mapping processes. So moving on to drafting the guidelines for best practice, we've been making good progress with, we now have a complete draft of our guidelines. These guidelines have been put together to support application and mapping of ontologies. In working up a documentation in collaboration, we make use of a project wiki to do that. And these guidelines are proving to be useful as a checklist. So when selecting ontologies suitable for mapping in a particular domain to support a particular application, this is where it's very useful to have considered the different aspects of the guidelines for best practice to make sure that there's good quality across the ontologies that are looking to be mapped. And if there are issues, it's as well to understand what those issues are for the source ontologies prior to trying to map, and see if there's what steps can be taken to make the mapping process work as well as possible. So that's a major use of the best practice guidelines, and also we're hoping that they are going to be useful to the ontology providers, because it kind of gives it represents our view as practitioners of using ontologies, the things that are important for that we consider as a user community. Next slide, please. Okay, the final aspect of progress, which is due to be delivered by year end, is actually the tool requirements. So in this illustration, I've captured basically the vision of the tool. Basically, this is a high-level view, and it consists of three components. In the center is the user interface. The user interface has two major aspects. There is going to be a sort of high-level visualization of ontological space, so different ways in which the different ontologies that are going to be mapped together to support a particular domain or application need to be visualized at a high level, just to see how they fit together. And then a second aspect of the user interface is the mapping alignment editor. And one thing that we ran into, which we hadn't appreciated at the onset, was in this arena, mapping is synonymous with matching. So ontologies can be mapped and they can be matched. And it turns out that there's a whole community out there. And this is why on the right, we have the framework side of the tool. So there are ontology matching algorithms that are at the heart of the mappings, making the mappings. And there is a mature community doing that. I've got a slide on the mature community that actually generates these algorithms. So we're looking to make use of those algorithms who are produced by groups already. We don't want to reinvent wheels. And in our framework for the tool, we're defining workflow for how these algorithms are being used in conjunction with the mapping editor. And an important part of the workflow is evaluation of the quality of the mapping or the matching. So a third aspect, which is very important, is import and export of mappings. So any pre-existing mappings are valuable resources, so they should be made use of either as seed for expanding an initial mapping so it goes broader, or it might be a reference mapping which can help to assess quality. And then when a mapping has been produced, usually in a cyclic manner, a mapping will need to be rendered into a suitable alignment format which can be published and exploited. So that's where the export of mappings part of the tool is important. So that's currently being drafted in detail, the requirements. This slide tells you a bit more about those ontology matching algorithms. On this slide, it's a very busy slide. I don't really want you to take too much notice of the detail, which is largely unreadable. But you will see some useful URLs. There is an ontology matching community. So ontologymatching.org is the website. And they run an annual evaluation initiative. And this organization's been running since 2004, so it's pretty mature. And for the last 5 years or so, evaluation of algorithms are done in a sort of challenge mode, and they use quite a sophisticated evaluation platform. So this is very nice and something that we would like to tap into. And so we have, in our community of interest, we have people who are heavily involved in this ontology matching evaluation initiative are in part of our community of interest. In fact, there's even a textbook on ontology matching, which is actually a very useful textbook. So just make sure, if you want to know more about ontology mapping, you are also using matching as a synonym when you are looking for further information, because you will find an awful lot more of useful things out there. Okay, and the other thing that is interesting here is, whilst there's a strong ontology matching community, there's also a strong sort of ontology community who create ontologies, with the aspiration of curating as well as possible. And a great example of such an ontology curation community is the Obo Foundry people. And so the Obo Foundry itself is growing and evolving, and we have key members of that community involved in our community of interest. People like Professor Barry Smith at University of Buffalo are involved in our community of interest. And we've come to realize that there are strengths in the different parts of the ontology overall community, and it's too easy for there not to be crosstalk between these different aspects of the ontology world. And so one of the emerging themes from our project is we realize that culturally we're providing bridges, for the different communities working in this area, and trying to help people, understand each other better and to generate avenues of communication. And that's one of the reasons I was very keen to accept David's invitation to tell you all about our project for the Yosemite project community. Okay, my next slide, please, David. Okay, so as you've just heard, the community of interest is a very important part of our project. Okay, besides Pistoia members who are on the left of this little list here, the list is obviously much bigger than this. On the right is probably more interesting, actually. You'll see I've listed the ontology matching people, who I've just described in detail. Obo Foundry I've touched on, the protein consortium people, biosharing and ISA people at University of Oxford, a text mining company called Lingvomatics are very involved in what we get up to. The Allotrope Foundation, they are involved in analytical investigation, and they're looking to build ontologies around that whole area of science. And we have a very good relationship with them. A final plug is for the Elixir project, which is a pan-European infrastructure project, which is well funded across Europe. There's an interoperable services sort of arm to Elixir, and they are part of our community of interest and very important people too. So we're really hungry and happy for expanding our community of interest, and so would be very interested in the Yosemite members being involved in what we get up to through the community of interest. So that brings me to my final slide, where I talk to the future plans for the next phase. I described this in some detail when this last came up. Of course, the thing here on this slide is in red. For this to happen, we need to get further funding. And so that's what we'll be doing in early 2016. We will be raising funding so that the next phase can happen. I've told you all about what the next phase will be. And so we're fairly optimistic that we can get the necessary funding to carry on with this project. And that's where we're going with it. So thank you for your attention. And I think that is my last slide. If you move on, David, I think yes. So this prompts me to ask, are there any questions that have come in through email? Because I'd be happy to try and tackle them.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Ian. So let me take a look here. So yes, here is our first question is, who is going to do the actual mapping work? Is the hope that this will be crowdsourced for nothing using a tool online, for instance, or will they employ curators?
Yes, it's a good question. And that is the service side of things. And so the first part of the service is to define what that service looks like, and then to figure out how to make the service happen. Now, it could well be that that service is something that there are academic organizations like the Elixir interoperable services who are already doing that kind of thing, and with some extra funding coming from the Pistoia Alliance, we can bring extra resource. So paying for curation, providing incentive for that to happen, and also that kind of service does need to be made so that it is a sustainable business proposition, where the users of such a mapping service are going to be willing to pay for it, because it means they don't have to do it, and therefore they can put some budget into buying into that service. So that's how the sustainability is going to be tackled, in that kind of manner, and the money raised will pay for it to happen. As I mentioned, it could be an academic group like the Elixir Interoperability Services or EBI or NCBI. It could be a group like that that's attracted, and it could be equally a commercial organization. I know some of the publishers are quite interested in developing businesses around mapping services. I know of 2 big publishers who are particularly keen on that. They're thinking in terms of actually sharing their ontologies openly, and to develop service around mapping between ontologies, both those which they produce as well as ontologies that are open source. And actually the mapping is all part of the knowledge building and the knowledge management, which is where a lot of the commercial opportunity lies. So that's my best answer to your question.
Okay. Next question is, what ontologies will be your highest priority to map to each other?
That's where these test cases come in. So disease and phenotype and selected aspects of experimental investigation are the current priorities, both because we're using them at the moment to test our specification of requirements and guidelines, but also when it comes to implementation and testing how well either the tool or the service is able to work. They're the test cases that we will be using to see how well it works. Okay, but we are hoping that the tool or the service are going to be will have some generic qualities to them, although there will be some domain specific aspects to some of how the ontologies are going to be mapped. But we're hoping there is going to be a reasonable amount of commonality. So we shall see how that goes. So that's my best answer for that one.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Do you expect the ontology mapping to influence the design of ontologies, to put back pressure on them, to help those ontologies better align with each other from the start? If so, how?
Yeah, it's yes, I think is the short answer, and it's a yes because okay, part of our guidelines make it clear that that when ontologies are being built by whoever from whatever source, if they're reusing parts of reference ontology, which many application ontologies do, that's fine as long as they reference the original reference ontology, through a URI. If they're creating new identifiers, then that's probably not good practice and can create problems. So that's why the guidelines for best practice is important, and many of the overlaps, if they're done in a way that's sort of harmless because identifiers are being used properly, then the mapping process should be straightforward. And when there are conflicts or things that don't make sense, that can be resolved at the orthologous level, but also it can be resolved using upper ontologies as well. That can come into it. But the final piece, which is important, is the mapping. Really, in doing the mappings, they will reflect and evolve in line with how the source ontologies are evolving to reflect the new science. And so there needs to be some good efficient mechanisms for feeding back from the mapping production to the source ontology providers. So really what you don't want is to fork the source ontologies and make new versions of those. If there are things that aren't right which create problems for mapping, the best solution is to work with the creators of the original source of ontologies which are being mapped to help improve the source ontologies. So that's one of the things in our requirements we're saying is our editor should not be allowed to edit the source ontology. It can only edit the mappings. And if there is a problem with the source ontology, use pre-existing ontology editors that are out there already, like Protégé, and preferably work with the creators who are providing the source ontologies so that everybody benefits from improvement.
Okay. This next one is a long one, but it ties in with what I think it ties in with what you were saying.
Yep.
What will be the result of mapping one ontology to another? How will the mapping be expressed? What will we be able to do with the mapping? How much more work will be needed after an ontology mapping is done to enable instance data expressed in one ontology to be automatically translated to be expressed in the other ontology? One level of ontology mapping is to say that concept X in ontology A is almost the same as concept Y in ontology B. And ontology matching seems to be the task of discovering those relationships. But a more ambitious level of ontology mapping is to say more precisely exactly how concept X relates to concept Y. so that instance data in one ontology of concept X, say, can be converted to instance data in the other ontology. And data expressed in both ontologies can then be usefully integrated. How far does the Pistoia Alliance project plan to go in its mapping effort toward fully capturing the detailed relationships between concepts in different ontologies to support this automated data translation? Wow, that was a mouthful.
Yeah, that's quite a big question, isn't it? And quite a tough question as well. I've always been a pragmatist rather than a perfectionist, and I'm also a fan of 80-20 when it comes to pragmatism. So, in other words, you know, beyond getting things 80% right, if you really try and put effort into getting the other 20% right as well, the law of diminishing returns tends to creep in and undermine efforts. So the trick is to make sure that the straightforward mappings, the low-hanging fruit, happens efficiently. And then when there are areas which are challenging technically challenging to do, that's where the smart head from the curator comes into play to make judgments. And then you make sure that you only use that really expensive resource of the human curator in parts of the mapping where it really is important to get it right. So you really need a way so that you know which parts of your mapping really are critical to your application, and other parts look less important. Of course, the weakness of my argument, my answer there, is that there are often situations where a priori you don't know which bits are going to be important and which bits are going to be less important, and so that can really undermine you. so that is the weakness to my argument. But nevertheless, you will never get perfection, and there will always be messiness and noise because we're dealing with biology here. It's the life sciences. And so I still believe as a pragmatist that you do your best and you get enough of it working well enough to be fit for the purpose that you're trying to support. So there you go. And my other response is you're asking hypotheticals, and until we get there, you really don't know what real strategies, what real tactics are going to work and be practical. So yeah.
Okay.
So there you go. That's the best I can do with that one.
Yep. And the last question I have here is, are your best practice guidelines publicly available, or will they be? And if so, where?
They will be available at our next step, because at the moment we are within the project team kicking them into shape to make sure that they really are useful. So we're testing them out with the test cases that I described to try and get that right. And we will be ready to share with our community of interest. That'll be the first step, really, to consult and to find how useful others find what we've done when we explain and recommend how they can be used and explain why we think they are useful. And no doubt they will grow. They will go through iterations to make them better as a result of consultation with our community of interest. And once we're happy with them, once we've got a reasonable amount of confidence that they are fit for the purpose they're intended, and I'm hoping this will be early in 2016, like the first quarter, that kind of timing, we will then be happy to make them available, probably via the Pistoia Alliance website, which is open. There will be a suitable link pointing to where our guidelines live. And the other thing to mention, I'm not sure I emphasized it, is our guidelines are well aligned with other guidelines like the Obo Foundry principles, which are out there already, they are very well aligned with those. So we cross-link to those as well. So early next year is what I'm looking for to make these openly available when they are ready to go.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ian, and thanks for your work on this. It's exciting to hear about it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thanks for participating. If anybody would like to receive notice of future Yosemite Project events or webinars, just visit yosemiteproject.org and click on the link to join our email list. Thank you all for now, and goodbye until next time.
Thank you, everybody.